still think you should take on this mic. Don't worry. When it's time for questions, I grab one back into the audience.
Okay, cool.
If you need me to still to help you with something, I can do that.
Welcome back, everyone. You're so far away. Do you want to get closer? Yeah, come on down. Thank you. Get cozy. We're among chosen family here. Who needs Greg? What's his name? Thank you. All right, we're going to get started. Welcome back. Can come on up. How we feeling? Radio Days? How we feeling, Radio Days? A little better. So yeah, last session of the day. Thank you for being here. You can get in a quick disco nap before the party tonight. But I'm very excited to have put together this session, and I'm glad that you are here because this is going to be very important for all of your organizations going forward, because according to various sources, anywhere between 20 and 30% of Gen Z identifies as some flavor of queer. And we're always talking about how to reach younger audiences, how to, future-proof your news organizations and your radio stations. And so it's really time to wake up to the fact that queer topics are not niche topics. And so we're going to learn more about how we can raise queer voices and create really authentic content that is ultimately going to be a very smart audience and business strategy for your news organizations. So I would be very pleased to bring up Miriam Harner, who is the editor-in-chief of Welcome in Club by Pulse and our local public broadcaster, Bavarian Radio. So if we could please get her slides up, please. Yes.
Hello. Thanks for coming. My name is Miriam Harner. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm very glad to be here. Thank you. How to raise LGBTIQA voices and earn listeners' loyalty. I want to explain this on the example of Willkommen im Club, the queer podcast of Pulse. A queer podcast by a public broadcasting service. It's kind of funny and sad at the same time that up to this day we are the only queer format at the Bayerischer Rundfunk. So I'm proudly representing the queer community over there. What is Willkommen im Club? What is this? The concept. It's my first time on a panel, so please be kind.
Yeah, you got it.
Oh, thank you. Well, first and foremost, we are a podcast, and in this podcast, we get to know the queer community together with our audience. We talk about issues and problems facing queer people, and our queer hosts share their own stories and experiences, gather new impressions on site, and invite queer guests, obviously. And we try to answer questions like, why is coming out still a big deal in these days? What happens at the gay sauna? And why is transphobia on the rise? Our target groups are two different target groups. Primary, queer people between 16 and 25, so Gen Z is calling, who are aware of their sexuality and gender identity and want to know more about the queer scene. So it's not only, we like to call them the baby queers, but also, a bit the starters, but also the older ones. And our secondary target group are non-queer allies, also quite young. For example, friends with friends and siblings, colleagues, flatmates, just who want to have say on queer issues. Where can you find us? The podcast is quite old. We release every Wednesday a new episode on all podcast platforms, and tomorrow we are releasing the 124th episode. So we are releasing since May 2020. And also you can find us on Instagram. So we publish additional content there on the topics of our podcast. For example, facts and studies, but we make it cool. And we publish reels with podcast snippets from our really, really pretty podcast studio. We are very lucky to have it. But most importantly, we keep in touch with our community over there. So how do we raise queer voices at Willkommen im Club? The first one is kind of obvious. It does want to. I don't know. Why it's not working. It's always the same with PowerPoint, isn't it?
That's okay, we're listening.
Okay. Well, there we go. The first one is quite obvious. We have queer hosts. So our hosts, Sophia and Demi, belong to the LGBTIQ community themselves. So Sophia is bisexual, Demi is queer, and they are also both well known in the German-speaking queer community and have their own successful social media accounts. So that's the first one. The second one is that, of course, we also have queer guests. Also, our experts are queer. So we try to find the queer experts out there. They are there, you just have to look a bit closer maybe sometimes. And we also want diversity within our queer guests, so we established a so-called diversity checklist. So we try to not only to find the queer experts and guests, but also maybe somebody with a disability, BPOC, non-academic, or Flinta. So we really try to diversify. The third point is, of course, we're talking about queer topics. So we have a great variety in our topics, and within we try to have a well-balanced mix of different perspectives of the queer community. I give you an example. When we plan our next season of the podcast, we are aware not only to cover only gay topics, but maybe not only lesbian or gay topics, but also maybe a trans topic. And the fourth point is that our whole podcast team is queer, which is kind of remarkable and unusual for public broadcasting editorial staff to be 100% queer. How we earn listeners' loyalty at Willkommen im Club? The first point is that we try to be as authentic as we can. So our hosts share their personal experiences and struggles as queer people. For example, how their coming outs went. They give insights on their dating life. But also they take the audience in our reports to places our hosts want to discover themselves. For example, Demi wanted to go to a queer speed dating event privately, but then he had the idea, oh well, that could be very interesting topic also for a podcast episode. So yeah, we made a podcast out of it. The next point is we try to involve our community as much as we can in our podcast. For example, we ask them to send voice messages. We encourage our audience to reach out to us via Instagram or email, and we try to encourage them in every podcast episode. And in the podcast, we talk directly and at the eye level to our audience. So they don't feel like, oh, this is my teacher who wants to explain something to me, but more like, oh, that's my friend who's trying to explain something to me, or maybe my big sister or big brother. We also try to go where our audience is. So you can find us on Instagram, as I mentioned, at Willkommen im Club, and hopefully soon on TikTok as well. But we're also doing live podcast shows, for example, at Pulse Open Air, but also at the CSD Cologne. We were invited there last year, and it was pretty amazing to meet up with our audience. And it's always so much fun and quite emotional, I have to admit. And the fourth point is that we are trying to focus on our community management. Why are we doing so? So we professionalized first our community management from the beginning. So we use tools like SWOT for community management. And why are we doing so? Because our goal is to answer comments and messages as fast as possible. But more importantly, we try to be a safer space for our community. So we also have a very strict netiquette, and we like to block people when they are beep holes. Yeah. How do we profit from this strategy? Well, first, we have a very high credibility, not only within our audience, but also at professionals. For example, teachers use our episodes to educate their classes about queer topics, and we just had the case that a therapist recommended our episodes to their queer patients, which is pretty amazing. And our community trusts us in a very, very deep, humbling way, I have to say. So people share very personal stories with us, either via text or voice memo or in the comment section. They ask us for advice. We are at the same level, I would say, and it's a very, very rewarding job to be connected to them. And yeah, it's a great job. So tune in, and thank you for listening.
Thank you, Miriam. I don't think I've ever been more upset that I don't understand German. But I'm really happy that you were able to share that, because that's one thing I really love about Radio Days, is that we get to discover all sorts of amazing projects that we would never have access to otherwise because of language barriers. So with that being said, I'm very happy to bring up Rozenn Le Carboulec, who is a French author, journalist, podcaster, and she's going to talk about Quouir.
Hello, everybody. Thank you, Sarah, for inviting me here today, and thank you to Radio Days. Oh, okay. I don't have such a beautiful presentation, so I'm sorry in advance. I will talk about my podcast, but not only, because I'm not only a podcast producer. So I'm a French journalist. I work mainly on LGBT plus topics and gender issues and discriminations for Mediapart, which is an independent investigative media in France. I've been editor-in-chief of Têtu, a gay magazine. I am a lesbian, as you can see it or not. Maybe the undercut, maybe a clue, but it's not always the case. I'm French, as you can hear it, of course. I'm a writer. I wrote a book named Les Humiliés last year about the legalization of same-sex weddings in France 10 years ago, which has been very violent for LGBT plus people. I also launched a newsletter last year named Gender Cover that addresses gender issues, discriminations, and anti-gender movements or anti-rights movements in Europe. And I also created a podcast named Quouir. It was in 2018. I think it was the first native podcast about LGBT topics in France at this time. And there was a big lack of representation in the mainstream media. For example, at that time, I was working at Le Nouvel Obs, which is a big news magazine in France from the left wing. I don't know if you say that, yeah. So a progressive media. And even in that magazine, we used to publish homophobic articles and homophobic opinion pieces. So it was a very traumatic experience as a lesbian journalist for me at this time. And this is after that I realized I couldn't be in the closet anymore, and I would have to be openly lesbian in my work and to address LGBT plus topics. Because if people concerned don't manage to take up those topics, nobody would. So yeah, I created my podcast Quouir, Quouir, which is a word game between queer, so I suppose you know that word, and ir, which means to listen in French. I made 3 seasons. The first one was about coming out, the second one about homoparentality, so same-sex parenting, and the third one was about Augustin, a young gay man who was taken to homophobic protests by his parents, so during the debates about same-sex weddings, the legalization of same-sex weddings in France. It was very huge demonstrations in France organized by a movement named La Manif pour tous, which is the demonstration for all, but it should have been called the demonstration for nobody, or or the minority protests, because it was really a minority in society against gay marriage at this time. And what can I say more about my podcast? In Quouir, I try to have also LGBT people relatives. So I also interview the parents, for example, brothers and sisters. And in the last season about Augustin, this gay man taken to homophobic protests by his parents, I have her mother and his sister, for example. I'm not sure I could have done this work at Le Nouvel Obs or in other mainstream media, because as Maria Lorenz Bokelberg said yesterday, podcast is a safe space. It's a safe space for women, for minorities, because it's an intimate form, and it's not a coincidence if in France, but not only in France, the most famous podcasts are created by women and by minorities. So in France, for example, we have La Poudre, which is a podcast, a long-form interview with women. We have Les Couilles sur la table, which literally means balls on the table, which aims to deconstruct masculinities. And I think that today podcasts still have a big role to play in the lack of representation of minorities. I don't know if I have still time. Yeah. Okay. Because there is very few LGBT plus media in France. We have Tétu, which is mostly a gay magazine. I used to work there, and yeah, there were a very big lack of representation of lesbian and trans people in that magazine. So podcasts still have a big role to play because LGBT topics seems to be not bankable for the press, but they can be in the audio game. As Mathieu Ravol from EBU said yesterday, podcast listening helps 71 of listeners to raise taboo topics with relatives. And unfortunately, gender issues and LGBT plus topics are still a taboo in many countries and even in France. And may I add just one thing about precariousness, which is a very hard word to pronounce in English. As you probably know, minority groups are also often more precarious. So if you hire them, pay them well, treat them well, trust their expertise in these issues, don't turn them into pig-washing or feminist-washing puppets, even if I have nothing against puppets. They can help you to reach a new audience, and this audience reserves as much respect as the others. That's all for me. Thank you.
What an incredible call to action. Thank you, yes. And please keep your questions in mind because we're hopefully going to have a really nice chunk of time at the end to get into some conversations together among friends, safe space. But lastly, I would love to bring up Ella Gibson-Weekes, who is an independent podcast producer, to talk about a couple little podcasts that you've produced, like Swipe Your Sign and The Tutus. Come on up.
Hello everyone, yes, thank you for introducing me. I'm Ella and I'm a podcast producer from London, and I would love to talk to you today about, an independent podcast that I produced called the Tutus podcast, and Swipe Your Sign, which was a podcast that I made for BBC Sounds and BBC Radio 1 Extra. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about my key findings that I found, the importance of creating community around these kinds of titles. So starting off with Tutus. Tutus is an independent podcast hosted by two best friends called Nana and Ro. They are black, masc-presenting lesbians like myself, living in London, and the podcast aims to kind of bridge the gap between the cisgendered straight people and the queer community. And we do that by having a range of topics of conversations. One moment they could be talking about their crazy sex lives, and when I say crazy, it's a bit much sometimes. They really go for it. And then we can get into super important topics like the anti-LGBT bill that is currently being passed in Ghana, which is putting a lot of queer and just members of the LGBT community in Ghana in a lot of harm. It's really serious stuff, and there's two Ghanaian women living in London. That's something that they feel really strongly to talk about. I also want to talk to you today about Swipe Your Sign. As I said, it's a podcast that I co-created and produced for BBC Sounds and BBC 1 Extra, and it was the first ever black queer dating podcast, loosely based on astrology, a super fun format that I hope you guys check out. It's all out there on BBC Sounds now, so please do go and check it out. And the idea around Swipe Your Sign was to create an engaging and entertaining format that spotlighted a plethora of black queer talent and also appealed to young black audiences as a whole, as BBC 1 Extra is a radio station that is predominantly aimed towards kind of a younger black audience. And then finally, we also really wanted to tap into the queer community as a whole. And how we aimed to do that was we created an engaging speech format that wasn't just about identity and wasn't about community, and the reason and wasn't just about coming out. And the reason that we did that is because, like I said, this was on a platform that was specifically aimed at young black audience rather than just a queer audience. So we wanted to show that we can make formats and content that is, centered, not solely centered around their queerness, but had their queerness at the forefront of it. We were also, we aimed to get, amazing talent in. So the first host was Nathan Henry, who's from a popular show over in the UK called Geordie Shore. He's got like 1.5 million Instagram followers, and we paired him with Ro, who I just spoke about from the Tutus podcast, who has a much smaller following, but paired together, their energy was super unmatched. And I'm going to come back to talking about kind of that pairing in a moment. We had amazing guests, we had musicians, we had comedians, we had influencers, and again, we really wanted to show the kind of plethora of queer black people that was around in the UK, and I feel like we absolutely did do that. We had a live activation at UK Black Pride, which is the world's largest free black queer celebration, and we put on an amazing, kind of fun version of the show, and that coming to that celebration, it welcomes 25,000 people come to attend, so it was a great kind of first push for the show, which we were super excited about. We then went on to do live shows in multiple cities around the UK, and created kind of like lots of bespoke social content, billboards, campaigns, and so on. And as exciting as it was creating Swipe Your Sign, it felt like an uphill battle from the start. We were trying to gather a community of people that pretty much had no idea what BBC Sounds was, didn't engage with the platform, and yeah, in essence just weren't there. So instead of pulling the usual BBC kind of marketing levers and stuff that we would usually do, we had to kind of start thinking outside the box, and that's why we went to doing our kind of live shows, doing our billboard campaigns and so on. But it got me thinking just a lot about community and how we create community around queer podcasts, because I'm personally under the impression that it's really hard to create community in 12 episodes, which is what we had to do with Swipe Your Sign. So reflecting on Swipe Your Sign and then taking it over to Tutus that we've been going for 5 years. I don't know if it's a queer thing because we are also out every Wednesday. We are 181 episodes deep, so we'll be on 182 episodes, which is super exciting, and that's available across anywhere you get your podcast, so please do take a listen. But yeah, from the kind of difference in having a longer running show to a show that just run over 12 episodes, and the difference in the community that you can create, I noticed personally worlds of difference. So here are some of my key takeaways when it comes to creating community around this type of content. I would start off by saying building a real community takes time. If you're not receiving the numbers in the first 6 months, in the first years, I would say hold on. I would say keep going, because community takes time. Getting loyal listeners, people that want to come back, people that want to get to know you and get to know your talent, that is going to take a moment. So don't be disheartened if you're doing a podcast that's seasonal and within the first season you're not necessarily getting the numbers you expected. Keep pushing through, please do it. We need content like this out there, so please keep going. Secondly, I would say authenticity is everything. When it comes to Nana and Ro on the Tutus podcast, they are unapologetically themselves, and that's why we can, I feel like, go into such a range of different top-ups, because they are so diverse. They are here to talk about their culture, like I said, back home in Ghana. They're here to talk about being, young and living in London and everything that comes with being masculine presenting, what that comes with. And I think it's important when we talk about authenticity as well, is as much as we want to grow our podcasts as wide as we want to grow them and, really extend our reach, in doing that, we have a lot of queer terminology that, not everyone, I feel like, is gonna understand. And I think there's ways with, navigating how we express that to audiences that are outside, like our initial groups. But I would say, instead of explaining every single detail, instead of having a term and feeling like you have to over-explain, you can do some explaining, you can be creative with it, but I don't believe you should go and over-explain yourself, as that is kind of taken away from your actual core target audience, and is in effect going to make them feel like, actually, this isn't for me, because why would you explain something that I use in my everyday life? So just think about things like that, and think about authenticity in terms of, as a producer, I really like to keep my talent at the core. Although I very much like to navigate the conversation and give them topics and stuff to talk about, I have these conversations with them before going into recordings, as for the most part, I want the content to come from them. I want it to feel real. I want it to be about topics that they talk about. They're also at a slightly different stage in life with me. I want them to come from their perspectives rather than it being solely on kind of producers handing over everything. What I learned comparing both Swipe Your Sign and Tutus is that when it comes to talent, I would say, and you put it perfectly when we spoke about it last night, quality over quantity. On Swipe Your Sign, we had Nathan Henry, who, like I said, has 1.5 million followers on Instagram, and Ro, who has a much less following. But when I actually went and kind of assessed their engagement on socials, when it came to Swipe Your Sign, a lot of Nathan's followers and stuff were just liking, and you can tell they would scroll on, they're not getting engaged with the content. Whereas Ro, who has a much, much smaller following than Nathan, was just filled with comments and people engaging with the content, people just bigging her up, people wanting to hear more, wanting to know when the next episode's coming out. And for me, I feel like that gives a lot more value to your piece of content than just having, someone with loads of followers and just likes and they kind of move on, not engaging with the content. Maybe you won't listen to the whole series. So really think about that, quality over quantity. And then finally, I would say a big thing that we do, especially with Tutus, is listening to your audience. Really listen to your audience and adapt to their needs, whilst also keeping your vision for what the podcast is and maintaining the core of the podcast. To explain that a bit further, an example is when I first came onto the podcast, so they was running for about a year before I came on, and when I first came on, I said to them, what do you guys want for the podcast? What kind of guests are you looking for? Like, what is your vision? And they were really keen at that point in time to bring in loads of guests. They wanted to really show, like I was talking about, just the plethora of the queer community and the black queer community in the UK and the kind of black diaspora around the world. And I thought that was amazing, and we still do a lot of that, but actually feedback coming from our audience was that we prefer the episodes when it's just the two of you. And we heard that on numerous occasions, people reaching out to us on socials, and that very much did reflect in the numbers on episode to episode. And instead of just, being headstrong and saying, no, you need to hear all of these amazing stories from people, which we think you do, we kind of met a middle ground. We cut down on the episodes with guests, and we amped up the episodes with just the two of them, and then we really honed in on getting the guests that we really thought was going to be give them, our audience, the richest content, the most engaging content that we felt like needed to happen. And interact with your audience. We do a lot on social media. We have recently introduced a lot of, they've become agony aunts to, I feel like, their community and people that they've created around you. Use the features on Instagram, allow their, we do a lot of ask us questions or send in dilemmas, really engage with your community as much as you can, and I think you'll be in for some great content, so thank you.
I'm gonna hand this mic over to you. What do you want to know from our panelists?
Any questions?
Hi, I have a question for Miriam. I don't know a lot about the context of the media group that allowed you to create the podcast. How did it happen that you convinced them? What was the pitch that convinced them to let you do this?
Well, it's a public broadcasting service, so you should think that they are pretty open to a queer podcast, since the goal is to represent the whole society. Well, but it wasn't, obviously. So it took some time to convince them. Especially, you have to know, we are here in Bavaria, and Bavaria is known to be quite conservative, also within Germany. So it was a big surprise, and what the fuck? The Bavarian Rundfunk has a queer podcast when we released. I have to admit, it wasn't my idea to do this podcast. It was Julian Wenzel. He is the former host of the Common Club. And he's the best. Actually, I don't really know what he did, but I think he had this idea from a very early stage on, so he was just persistent, I guess. And he's also a very good connector, and he's very good connected to important figures within the organization. So I think that was kind of a key. And yeah, I mean, he's a white gay man, so you know it yourself. They are pretty good in networking. So yeah, it's I tried to learn from that, and so I'm very glad to sit here on the stage with those very, very clever, intelligent, inspiring women. And I'm glad you are here. So yeah.
Can I have a follow-up?
Sorry?
Can I have a follow-up question?
Yes. Sure.
How is it sustained? Like, do the media group have issues with subjects, or do they allow you to do your thing? What's the feedback from the company?
Well, actually, it's pretty good, but sometimes, I mean, we are here in this safe space, right? I want to be completely honest. Sometimes I have the feeling that we are kind of a token as well. So there is this diversity report every year, and we are proudly presented on it every year. But when there was the, oh my God, I don't know, it's getting a bit political maybe. But when there was the BR Podcast Festival, we weren't invited. And yeah, that's sad. That's really sad. And at the same time, yeah, you have to understand that it's a massive organization, and there are many people, yeah, who have to learn a lot about queer audience and queer people. When we had a new gender rule, so how to gender at the Bayerischer Rundfunk a few years ago, we had a massive debate at the intranet. So, well, it's just like the society. So you have the fans and the support, but at the same time you have people who are pretty critical. But to be honest, we do what we want. And so we just released an episode on how queer and queer-friendly is the public broadcasting service. And yeah, we do what we want to do. Yeah, because we are journalists. So yeah, of course we have to.
One more, yeah. We have a few more minutes, so.
Hello, my name is Sabrina. I'm from Media Lab Bayern. I have a question about the audience. Is it that your audience is just the community of the LGBTQI+, or do you see that are people like the regular listeners from Bayerischer Rundfunk and so on? My question is for all the three of you. Are listening to your content, and maybe there's a positive feedback like thanks for telling me, thanks for showing me?
I would say for tutus, it's actually a mixture. I would say at the core is definitely the LGBT QIA plus community, but as the girls do, you know, not just allude to queer topics, we do have quite a diverse audience. But I'd say at its core, it's definitely a queer audience. Speaking for Swipe Your Sign. Again, I feel like because of the talent we got in and the ways we had to go around going and finding the audiences and the places that we did, that ultimately did, again, create a very queer audience. But with Swipe Your Sign, it was quite different because we really tried to angle it from a perspective that this isn't just a gay thing. Like, it just so happens that the people within the content are queer. So I think in doing that, we were able to kind of like bring in a slightly different demographic, which I'm really pleased about, because it's not just a queer thing. They just, you know, also happen to be gay, which is, you know, super exciting.
Yeah, I think my answer will be pretty short because I did Quouir for a podcast studio named Nouvelles Écoutes, and I don't have any information about who is actually listening to the podcast. So I really don't know. I can't answer to this question. But concerning, about the feedback I received, I can say that it's mostly queer listeners, but not only. I received messages from parents, for example. And in my work, I always try to reach straight people and non-concerned people because I think this is the way we can change and impact society. But yeah, so I hope there are straight listeners.
Well, we do receive messages mostly from parents or friends who are very grateful that they learn new stuff about the queer community and they understand their kids more. So I don't know if we get them to listen to other BR podcasts or radio shows, but they listen to us, and I think that's a great success. Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions? I'm reading the room here because it's a very intimate session, so I can extend this for 3 minutes if we're all willing to stay, but if not, this will be the last question.
Hi, I'm Alice. I'm from GCN magazine in Dublin. Ella, I was really interested in the fact that you have a podcast that kind of centers mask presenting people, because I feel like even as queer content kind of becomes more visible in mainstream, I still feel like mask women or, you know, mask presenting people are not as visible. It's something that I'd really like to do more, but then I am nervous from like an audience perspective if the audience or the appetite isn't there for it, if you go too niche. But what would be your kind of experience with that?
My experience with that would be that I don't think our audience does go too niche, and I think that is a credit to our talent, because although they're masculine presenting kind of on the outside and to the eye, they very much like embrace their femininity at the same time and can very much they always talk about like they have their moments where they embrace very much their masculinity, and then they also have their moments where they really embrace their femininity, and they're one of the girls. So I think they're amazing at kind of like giving that balance and kind of being able to draw in from kind of all aspects of the thing of our audience. I would say in terms of it does often feel like kind of from the industry, sometimes it feels a little bit more, we feel a bit more overlooked because of how they present, which is something that we just kind of constantly have to navigate. And I feel like that's like it's down to quite a few things. Them being masculine presenting, them being black, like we often feel overlooked rather than our kind of podcasting peers, which yeah, it's something that we navigate, and which is why I say really hold on when you have a kind of a concept like this and something that does maybe seem a bit more niche to the wider world. Keeping to yourself that, you know, you're not a niche. There's a lot of people out there that look like you, and there's a lot of people that need to have the representation. We always say that if you don't see it, you can't really be it. And growing up, I know that I would have really benefited from a tutus to like ground myself and make me feel like seen. So I hope they continue to do that and on a wider scale. I hope that answered your question.
Thanks.
Well, thank you very much, Sarah, for bringing this session to Radiodays Europe. This is very, very important. Thank you for the representation. And it's not just about that, because Ella was out here dropping loads and loads of tips that anyone can use on their podcast. Like, it looks like she could go on for days dropping those gems. So thank you very much, everyone. Have a very good evening to our speakers. I have just more information for you guys. There's a party tonight. I don't know who's excited about that. It's brought to you by our Bavarian main hosting partner, XPLR, and that will be at Blitz Club. I don't know where that is, but you can find it on your Swap app. So go party hard, party safe, get hangover, maybe not, whatever works for you, but we want to see you tomorrow on day 2. So have a good evening, everyone, and thank you again. You're amazing for being here. Wait 1 second, where is the photographer? I can get you a picture on anyone.